Good morning everybody. Today we are going to discuss anticoagulants. Before going into the details of anticoagulants, you should be clear about the coagulation pathway. You must be knowing from your knowledge of pathology that there are two pathways and various coagulation factors which are involved in these processes, which finally convert prothrombin into thrombin, and then thrombin converts fibrinogen into fibrin, then fibrin strong tangles are formed which controls bleeding. And this, what all is involved in this are the different coagulation factors which are secreted by the liver, and one factor activates the other, and the process goes on. Both the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathways ultimately convert factor 10 into 10A, then prothrombin to thrombin, and then fibrinogen into fibrin, which forms a clot. So we want to block this process to achieve anticoagulation. So how we do that? So we have different anticoagulants. These are the drugs which are used to reduce the coagulability of the blood. Now the classification, now anticoagulants, they are used both in vivo as well as in vitro. When we say in vivo, means inside the human body. In vitro means outside the human body, in the test tubes and all. So the in vivo anticoagulants used are further divided into parenteral and enteral anticoagulants. Parenteral, which are given intravenously or subcutaneously, these includes indirect thrombin inhibitors and direct thrombin inhibitors. Indirect thrombin inhibitors include high molecular weight heparin. We have low molecular weight heparin, which are enoxaparin, dalteparin, nadroparin, reviparin, parnaparin. Then we have fondaparinox, danaparoid. The direct thrombin inhibitors include heparinoids, hirutin, lepidolin, bivalirudin, and ergotraban. Now we have oral anticoagulants also, which are coumarin derivatives and indendione derivatives, which includes warfarin sodium, dicamerol, and phenandione. Now these are the oral anticoagulants. We have certain oral anticoagulants which are direct factor 10A inhibitors, which are rivaroxaban, epaxaban, edoxaban. Then we have oral direct thrombin inhibitor, that is dabigatran. So in vitro, this means when you want that the blood should not coagulate, whenever you give your sample for investigations, blood sample for getting tested for total blood count, or for any kind of test, if you want to get it done, you want your blood should not be coagulated. So the in vitro complexes, which calcium complexing agents which are used for their anticoagulant purposes are sodium citrate, sodium oxalate, sodium aditate. Even heparin is also used. 150 units are used to prevent clotting of 100 ml of the blood. Now we will first be discussing heparin as an anticoagulant. This is indirectly acting anticoagulant which is given parenterally. This was first discovered by a second year student, McLean, and he found that there is some, while he was performing some experiment in the lab, and he found that there is some powerful anticoagulant agent which is secreted by the liver, and later that agent was named by Howell and Holt as heparin. And it has been seen that heparin, it occurs in the mast cells, and the richest source of the mast cells are lungs, liver, and intestinal mucosa. Commercial heparin is produced from porcine intestinal mucosa and ox lungs. It is strongly acidic in nature because of the presence of sulfate and carboxylic acid groups. Pharmacokinetics of heparin, since heparin is highly charged and it has got a larger size, so it cannot cross the cell membranes, rather it crosses very poorly, so it has to be given parenterally. When we need low dosages of heparin, we use the subcutaneous route. When we need high dosages, we use both subcutaneous as well as intravenous route can be used. Heparin is metabolized in the liver, and half-life of the heparin depends upon how much dose has been used and it is excreted in the urine. So the pathway, this is, as I have already told you, the coagulation pathway has two phases, that is intrinsic pathway and the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway. Now these are the sequence of the various coagulation factors, how they are activated, and both these pathways ultimately convert prothrombin to thrombin. Now the factors which are affected by heparin, they are factor 12A, 9A, 11A, 9A, 10A and then thrombin. Whereas the factors which are vitamin K dependent, they are affected by oral anticoagulants. So we have a list of oral anticoagulants as well as heparin. Now the factors which are affected by heparin are the ones which I have already told you. Now the factors which are vitamin K dependent, they are factor 9, 10, 7 and prothrombin. So these are the factors which are affected, which are vitamin K dependent. Now what is the mechanism of action of heparin? How heparin acts? Heparin as itself is not an anticoagulant. So what happens? It requires the presence of antithrombin 3. This antithrombin 3 is present in the plasma. It acts as a cofactor and only then heparin is able to produce its anticoagulation effect. Heparin, what heparin does? Antithrombin inhibits the conversion of prothrombin to thrombin. Heparin potentiates the action of antithrombin 3. This is one method by which it produces anticoagulant effect. Another is heparin anticoagulant effect. Heparin anticoagulant complex neutralizes the actions of factor 2, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13. How all this happens, we'll be discussing this in details. Heparin binds to antithrombin 3 through a heparin unique pentasaccharide. So the structure of heparin, it has a pentasaccharide ring, and that basically brings about a conformational change in the reactive center of antithrombin 3. So what happens when heparin binds with antithrombin 3? It accelerates the antithrombin 3 mediated inactivation of clotting enzymes. Heparin also promotes the formation of thrombin antithrombin 3 complex by serving as a template that binds both thrombin and antithrombin. So what happens? We have these three things now, they are bound to each other. It is heparin, thrombin, antithrombin. So antithrombin 3, it forms an irreversible complex with coagulation enzymes, and once this occurs, heparin separates, it dissociates and can be reused. See, it is clear from this what I have told you. When there is no heparin, these are the clotting enzymes and this is antithrombin 3 present. But when you give heparin to the patient, heparin, it binds with antithrombin 3, brings about a conformational change, increases its activity, potentiates the activity of antithrombin 3. Then this antithrombin 3, it binds with clotting enzymes to inactivate the process. So this ternary complex formation is responsible for producing the anticoagulant effect. Now this antithrombin 3, when it binds with the clotting enzymes, and when this association occurs, the heparin, it dissociates from this complex and can be reused. Now, how this unfractionated or high molecular weight heparin is different from low molecular weight heparin? As the name suggests, the molecular weight of unfractionated is 30,000 daltons and the molecular weight of low molecular weight heparin is 5,000 daltons. Now, the biotransformation of unfractionated is low and low molecular weight heparin biotransformation is high, up to 90% undergoes biotransformation. Now the half-life is shorter and it depends upon the dose, and this has a longer half-life which is independent of the dose. Now unfractionated inactivates both factor 2A, that is thrombin, as well as activated factor 10, whereas low molecular weight heparin, it inactivates only activated factor 10. Anticoagulant effect produced by the high molecular weight is more effective as compared to the low molecular weight heparin. How do we do the monitoring? Monitoring is done by measuring APTT, activated, this is prothrombin time and all that. So this when we are giving low molecular weight heparin to the patient, we don't need to monitor it regularly, but this requires special assay in if necessary. In routine, there is no monitoring is required in this case. Now the adverse effects with the heparin is bleeding can occur, reversible alopecia, osteoporosis, thrombocytopenia can occur, but these side effects are lesser with low molecular weight heparin. And there is less chances of thrombocytopenia, but on long term use osteoporosis can occur even with low molecular weight heparin. Renal excretion is seen with low molecular weight heparin, it is excreted unchanged by the kidney, whereas this is cleared, high molecular weight is taken up by the reticular endothelial system. If there is overactivity of heparin or if there is toxicity of heparin, we have a reversal, that is protamine sulfate, but low molecular weight heparin is not fully reversed by protamine sulfate. This one, high molecular weight is not expensive, whereas low molecular weight is expensive. Now the dose response in case of high molecular weight heparin is less predictable, because there are two mechanisms of metabolism in case of high molecular weight heparin. And what happens when the first is when you give heparin, it is rapidly taken up from this by the plasma proteins, macrophages and endothelial cells. This is first phase of metabolism, and after that there is slow first order. Initially there is zero order followed by a slow first order clearance by the renals, whereas low molecular weight heparin has more predictable dose response because it does not bind to the plasma protein, macrophages and endothelial cells. So that is why the dose response is different in both the cases, and this one produces it produces more longer effect as compared to the high molecular weight heparin, because it is not taken up by the plasma proteins, macrophages and endothelial cells. The dose of high molecular weight heparin is 5,000 to 10,000 intravenous units. They are given bolus, then followed by 750 to 1000 units per hour by infusion. Bolus means you give the whole amount of the drug immediately intravenously, followed by slow infusion as 750 to 1000 international units per hour, and APTT is kept between 50 to 80 seconds. Now the low molecular weight heparin, it is given as 20 to 40 milligrams once daily. Like this, low molecular weight heparin is produced from heparin only, high molecular weight heparin only, by a special gel filtration technique. Now what are the advantages of low molecular weight heparin over unfractionated heparin. This is given subcutaneously. Bioavailability is better, that is 90% as compared to the heparin, which has only 20 to 30% bioavailability. So as I told you, this low molecular weight heparin has a longer half-life, and this does not require any monitoring, and there are lesser chances of hemorrhagic complications, and it appears to have lesser antiplatelet action, so less interference with hemostasis. Now, what are the uses of heparin? Whether it is low molecular weight or high molecular weight, they are given for the treatment and prevention of deep vein thrombosis. In what kind of patients you need to prevent deep vein thrombosis? These are bedridden, immobilized patient, old people, post-operative cases, post-stroke patients, in patients with leg fractures, and elective surgery who need to remain on the bed for the longer periods of time. And in elective surgery also there are chances of deep vein thrombosis. Now, the other cases of ischemic heart diseases, like when there is unstable angina, after myocardial infarction, after angioplasty, after coronary artery bypass surgery, and then after stent replacement, for all these conditions we need heparin. Then in patients of rheumatic heart disease, atrial fibrillation, we can give warfarin, we give heparin, we can give warfarin or heparin. We also prescribe low dose aspirin, decrease the stroke due to emboli. In these cases there is risk of stroke due to emboli, so to prevent these we give heparin, warfarin or low dose aspirin. Then these are also used in patients with cerebrovascular diseases if there is cerebral emboli, to prevention of recurrence. If the patient presents with this, to prevent recurrence we prescribe these group of drugs. Then for vascular surgery, prosthetic heart valves, retinal vessel thrombosis, extracorporeal circulation, or for hemodialysis, in all these cases to prevent thromboembolism we give heparin. Defibrillation syndrome, like in abruptio placenta, in malignancies, in infections, if there is increased consumption of the clotting factors, in all these cases we prescribe heparin. Now, the main side effect of heparin is heparin induced thrombocytopenia. So once you determine if the patient is on heparin and you find there is thrombocytopenia, immediately stop heparin and put the patient on direct thrombin inhibitors, because in these cases there is a thrombocytopenia, but don't prescribe platelets because they will react with the antibodies which are already being produced against them. They will cause more thrombosis. So in heparin induced thrombocytopenia, never infuse platelets to the patient. Put the patient on direct thrombin inhibitors. Now, the role of heparin in pregnancy. Since heparin cannot cross the placenta, so instead of warfarin, which is an oral anticoagulant, if in pregnancy patient needs anticoagulation therapy, always prescribe heparin, because warfarin, which is an oral anticoagulant, if you prescribe warfarin, what will happen? It will cross the placenta and will affect the fetus, and in the fetus it causes fetal warfarin syndrome, which includes low birth weight, slower growth, mental retardation, deafness, small head size, and malformed bones, cartilage and joints. Contraindications of the use of heparin are, if there is hypersensitivity reaction to heparin, don't give that. If the patient has bleeding disorders like hemophilia, if patient is already having thrombocytopenia, if patient has intracranial hemorrhage, GIT ulceration, threatened abortion, or in advanced renal and hepatic disorders, heparin is contraindicated. Now, antidote to heparin is protamine sulfate. That I told you, heparin is highly charged. It is negatively charged. Now, protamine sulfate, which is a basic peptide, it combines with heparin as an ion pair to form a stable complex without anticoagulant activity. So protamine sulfate and heparin, they combine, they form a complex, but this complex lacks anticoagulant activity. Now the hemorrhage can be reversed by protamine sulfate titrated so that 1 milligram of protamine sulfate is administered for every 100 units of heparin remaining in the patient. So for every 100 units we give 1 milligram of protamine sulfate. This is also, now protamine sulfate is also an anticoagulant because it interacts with the platelets, fibrinogens and other clotting factors. So it can make hemorrhage worse if it is given in very high dosages. Now protamine sulfate as such, it has anticoagulant activity. So initially when we give as an antidote to heparin, forms a complex with that and there is no anticoagulant activity. Suppose if you give protamine sulfate more than what is required, then it produces its anticoagulant effect and can worsen the condition. Now we come to the fondaparinux, which is another parenteral anticoagulant drug, which is a pentasaccharide with a specific sequence that binds with antithrombin 3 and inactivates factor 10. This does not bind with thrombin. Heparin, it was, we saw that heparin, it was binding with antithrombin 3 and then with the thrombin, and then it was producing the effect and it formed the complex and produced the effect. But fondaparinux, it binds with antithrombin 3, inactivates factor 10A. Bioavailability after subcutaneous injection is 100% with a longer half-life of 17 hours. It is largely excreted unchanged by the kidney, but not to be used. That is the reason that it should not be used in renal failure. It is less likely to cause thrombocytopenia as we have seen with heparin. Now because in that case when we give heparin, antibodies are formed against the platelet factor and it produces thrombocytopenia. Lab monitoring in fondaparinux is not required. There is no thrombocytopenia and it appears that it is better than heparin when given in a dose of 5 to 10 milligrams subcutaneous once daily. Now we have direct thrombin inhibitors. I told you whenever the patient develops thrombocytopenia with the heparin, we stop heparin and shift the patient to direct thrombin inhibitors, that is heparinoids. The direct thrombin inhibitors, what do? They bind directly with thrombin. They don't need any additional cofactor like antithrombin 3 and all. So what do? They do not bind to other plasma proteins like the platelet factors and all that. So whereas heparin was binding with them and as a result of which they produced thrombocytopenia. So that is the reason that we give direct thrombin inhibitors, because they don't need antithrombin, they don't bind with other plasma proteins like platelet factor 4 etc. That is why they are given if patients develop thrombocytopenia with heparin. That's these heparinoids, it includes lepuridine. The action is independent of antithrombin. This I have already told you. This is a direct thrombin inhibitor but is irreversible in nature. It is irreversible. So it is used in thrombosis which is related to heparin induced thrombocytopenia. And this heparin induced thrombocytopenia, again a repetition here. This is antibody mediated drug reaction mostly seen with unfractionated heparin. There is no antidote to lepuridine, so its effect is monitored by APTT, and adverse effects appear if antibodies are formed against thrombin lepuridine complex. If antibodies are formed against this complex, then adverse effects they appear. Now bivalirudin, this inhibits platelet activation also, and it is used in percutaneous coronary angiography. Argatroban, it is used in heparin induced thrombocytopenia as lepuridine I told you, with or without thrombosis. If there is thrombocytopenia, then thrombosis occurs, and even if thrombocytopenia has been diagnosed with the use of heparin and thrombosis has not yet occurred, in that case also we stop heparin and give a Gatroban. This is rapid in action and its action is short lasting. It is monitored by APTT and dose reduction is required in liver disease. This is what we have discussed till now about parenteral anticoagulants. Now we come to oral anticoagulants. The main beauty of oral anticoagulants is that they are given orally, and secondly they act by interfering with the synthesis of vitamin K. So all the clotting factors which are vitamin K dependent, they are affected with warfarin. So how the warfarin acts? Warfarin does not act directly on the clotting factors. What do? They act by interfering with synthesis of vitamin K. And now there are many factors which are synthesized by the clotting factors, synthesized by the liver. They depend upon vitamin K. So this warfarin, it inhibits vitamin epoxide reductase. I'll tell you later that how it produces the effect. It inhibits this enzyme which is responsible for regeneration of inactive vitamin K to active hydroquinone form of vitamin K. This is the factors which depend upon vitamin K. They are factors 7 which are involved in extrinsic pathway, like factor 7, factor 9, factor 10 and factor 2. Now when we give warfarin interferes with vitamin K. So when it interferes with the synthesis of vitamin K, so all the clotting factors which are dependent upon vitamin K will not be synthesized and will help in this anticoagulation process. But one thing very important, you start with warfarin today, it will not produce full anticoagulant effect immediately. This effect develops gradually over a period of 1 to 3 days, because as the level of clotting factors which are already present in the plasma, it declines progressively, because factor 7 it remains for 6 hours, factor 9 remains for 24 hours, factor 10 remains for 40 hours and factor 2 remains for 60 hours. So once these have already been synthesized, they will remain and will continue to produce their effect. But when we give warfarin, further synthesis of these factors is interfered with, so the anticoagulant effect, it develops gradually. Now the pharmacokinetics of warfarin, it is rapidly and completely absorbed after oral administration, so bioavailability is 100%. Now another very important factor is, like, it is highly bound to plasma proteins. 99% is bound to plasma proteins. It is biotransformation is mainly by the liver, and it depends upon the hepatic cytochrome P450 enzymes for its metabolism. And then it undergoes oxidation, glucuronidation, and then it gets metabolized. And very important thing is, it crosses the placenta, produces a teratogenic effect, and produces a fetal warfarin syndrome. Now it takes 12 to 16 hours before the effect is observed. Now mechanism of action, as I told you, it inhibits vitamin K. What happens? Like these drugs, they block gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid residue of clotting factors and endogenous anticoagulants C and S. How it happens? Like, this gamma carboxylation of these clotting factors is very important, and this is possible only if there is active vitamin K. Now this is coupled with oxidative deactivation of vitamin K, because when vitamin K helps in gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid, vitamin K, it helps in carboxylation of glutamic acid residues of these clotting factors. So when it does so, it gets deactivated. Now the after deactivation this has to get activated by epoxidase reductase enzyme. So what happens, these coumarin derivatives, that is warfarin and others, indodione derivatives, all inhibit the enzyme epoxide reductase, which converts vitamin epoxide to active hydroquinone or the reduced form of vitamin K. So what happens when this enzyme is inhibited? Now the vitamin K will not get activated. Once vitamin K is not activated, it will not be able to take part in gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid residues. So if gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid does not occur, this clotting factors will not get activated. You know, from the clotting cascade, one factor gets activated which activates the other inactive factor and make it activated, and so on. This is possible only if there is gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid in clotting factor. If gamma carboxylation is done by vitamin K. If vitamin K is not there, this carboxylation will not occur. If carboxylation will not occur, activation of clotting factors will not be there. So as a result of which, there will be no coagulation and you will get an anticoagulant effect. This is how the oral anticoagulants, they produce their effect. Now what are the uses? Their uses are same. Oral anticoagulants are used in all those conditions where we use heparin. Monitoring is necessary because of when we use warfarin, we need to monitor the effect of warfarin because of its low therapeutic index. And how do we monitor it? By we note the prothrombin time. So this time taken for the blood to clot. Patients on heparin are shifted to oral warfarin after 3 to 5 days. Now how much should be the INR? INR is the international unit for the clotting factors. So for the prophylaxis of deep vein thrombosis and similar indications, the INR has to be maintained between 2 to 2.5 hours, and this 2 to 2.5 minutes, and then for the treatment of deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, transient ischemic attack, it is to be maintained between 2 to 3, and for the recurrent thromboembolism and myocardial infarction, this has to be maintained between 3 to 3.5 units. Now the adverse effects with oral anticoagulants are bleeding is the common serious side effect. Epistaxis can occur, bleeding in the form of GI bleeding, internal hemorrhage, hematuria. Cutaneous necrosis can occur because of the decreased activity of these protein C, then endogenous protein C, then infarction of the breast, fatty tissue, intestine and extremities due to venous thrombosis caused again because of decreased activity of protein C. Now antidote for warfarin, we don't have any antidote as such. We give vitamin K for that cases. First is whenever there is side effects with warfarin, stop warfarin immediately. Give the patient vitamin K as an antidote, and not exactly that helps in the regeneration of the clotting factors. Now also give fresh frozen plasma. Prothrombin complex concentrates and recombinant factor 7A can also be administered. For heparin, antidote was protamine sulfate. For warfarin, we give vitamin K. We can give fresh frozen plasma. You can give prothrombin complex concentrates and recombinant factor 7A. Contraindication, as it causes fetal warfarin syndrome, already explained, should not be given in pregnancy. There are certain drug interactions. These are pharmacokinetic interactions. The agents, if they have a common enzyme which is involved in the metabolism of warfarin, if that is inhibited, then it will increase the concentration of warfarin. Then drugs that increase the metabolism of warfarin, they should not be concurrently administered. drugs which displace warfarin from the plasma protein site. That's again a risky factor that will increase the active form of warfarin in the plasma. So drugs that decreases DIT absorption, these are the pharmacokinetic interactions. Now pharmacodynamic interaction, it has a synergistic effect when it is given along with heparin and aspirin. So antibiotics, what do? They decrease the bacterial flora. So what happens? They decrease vitamin K synthesis, and as a result of which the vitamin this K synthesis when decrease, the effect of warfarin increases. Now the other drugs which are direct factor 10A inhibitors, rivaroxaban, this directly binds and inactivates factor 10 synthesis. Factor 10. So synthesis is not inhibited, but the factor 10 has already been synthesized. It binds directly with that and inhibits its action. Whereas the warfarin and all, what they did, they inhibited the synthesis of the clotting factors. Now this rivaroxaban is inactivating factor 10 directly. So rapid action without any lag period, short lasting action is there, does not require any lab monitoring, used for the treatment of deep vein thrombosis, 10 mg once daily starting 6 to 10 hours after surgery in atrial fibrillation to prevent stroke. Then we have oral direct thrombin inhibitor, that is dabigatran etixylate. It's a prodrug. It is hydrolyzed to dabigatran. Now what it does, it reversibly blocks the catalytic site of thrombin and produces a rapid anticoagulant effect. Oral bioavailability is low, no lab monitoring is required. It prevents it can be given after hip and knee joint replacement surgery to prevent venous thrombosis, and the dose is 110 milligrams once daily. This is all about oral and parenteral anticoagulants. I have tried to simplify it. I think it should be clear. If still you have any questions or queries, you can ask anytime. Thank you.